Hello and welcome to this episode of Mind the Gap, making education work across the globe with me, Tom Sherrington, and Emma Turner. Hello, Emma.
Hi, Tom. You all right?
Yeah, very good. I'm very excited about this. We're talking to the one and only, drum roll, Peps Mccrea. Hi, Peps. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, folks. Pleasure to be here and to be chatting with you.
I have to say that we are all united through the future edition of Walkthroughs, Volume 3. And Emma has written a fantastic section on writing, like what is writing. It's really like a punchy boom. It's really, I think it's fantastic, really crisp summary. And you've written this amazing walkthrough about motivated teaching. And I think you did it, and it was like, it's already the shortest book ever, and you made the shortest summary of the shortest book. So you have this sort of, you're sort of famous for wasting no words. And is that something you're happy with? Is that something you cultivated?
Firstly, like, A, thank you for a nice introduction. B, thank you for asking me to contribute to the walkthroughs. Very privileged to do so. However, when you asked, I remember thinking, my goodness, I've spent years trying to condense it down to this just like one book, and you're asking me to do it in one page. And so, but it was a great challenge, really good to force me to think about, how can you just distill this even further. And yeah, like the whole concise, ultra concise thing, I think is probably more of an accident than a design. I'm an engineer and then later maths teacher by trade, and I never really saw myself as being any good at writing. And so my strategy, my kind of coping strategy, was just to write as few words as possible and make sure they were as clear as possible. And it seems to have worked out okay for the kinds of topics that I'm trying to communicate.
Yeah, I think Dylan Williams says something about one of your books about literally, no word is wasted, and it is a bit of an art. I'm just going to flash it up on the screen now, because I was saying earlier that I have a copy of Motivated Teaching, but as happens to many good books that we only have one copy of in my house, they go to my wife's school when she thinks they're really going to be useful. So, and unfortunately, that's gone before I managed to buy a second one. So the only copy in the house no longer is in the house, which is a great sign. But I do have a copy on my phone of your walkthrough. So I'll just scroll up here. So I'm literally going to be referring to it on the photos of it on my phone.
Whereas I, Tom, have been a very good student and have 3 on my shelf and in my hand.
Wonderful teaching.
Full suite. Emma, you've got this full suite, so congratulations. That's great. Like, bingo there.
Do I have to shout like bingo or something? House.
But Tom, you've got one of the old school covers, so yeah, there's a bit of a that's a rare one. In the future it'll be worth so much more. But the interesting thing is that what that kind of tells you is a little bit about the other side of my writing, which is that it's self-published. So I kind of publish myself, and I've always done so, because it allows me to have full control over both the content and the cover. And so what you've seen there is a little bit of the journey that I've taken in terms of my own cover design. Back in the day, they were pretty shocking. They're not great now, but they're definitely better than they were.
Well, that's quite impressive. I'm very impressed to hear that. So I've seen you speak a few times, and one time I saw you at the Wellington Festival, and it was all very, it was like shoes and socks off, down, you have this whole kind of funky style. And I just thought, is that like you feel like you kind of need to be grounded or something to feel like you're connecting with the audience? Is that like
I'm not sure. Have you ever tried teaching? When I used to teach, we had the first school I worked in had carpets in the classrooms. Great design decision, because it supports with the acoustics, but also really nice from a teacher perspective, because you could kick off your shoes and just feel so it always just feels a bit nicer when you can connect with the ground, I think. I don't think there's nothing more spiritual than that, really. Just a nice feeling. And yeah, it's just something I've kind of always done when I've been at the front of a classroom. And so therefore, when I find myself like in a kind of conference setting, there's like a whole bunch of cues perhaps in there that make me feel a little bit more relaxed, a bit more at ease, like I was back in the classroom.
I suspect when you do it, it's like, hey, look, there's the Peps. He's so cool with his. If I did it, people are going, why has Tom just not put his shoes on?
The first time I saw you, Peps, and I just so happened to have the pen there. I saw you at Research and in London, and I was just completely taken aback with thoughts. Yeah, where's his shoes? What's going on? Why has the man got no shoes on? But it was absolutely brilliant, because I don't know whether it was intentional or whether it was part of your kind of what you do, but it was incredibly memorable, and I couldn't stop listening to you because I was immediately hooked on what you were going to say, because I'm thinking, I've never seen anybody present without any shoes on. This man must be a genius or crazy. I need to
either way. And this is great. This is great feedback. This is what I need to know for my the future presentations. What went well? Shoes off. Yeah.
We do have deeper questions. We do have deeper questions, but it's like a softball opener.
It's better. Like just relatedly, that's a bit better than often the other bit of feedback I get, which is around the tattoos. So I do I go and do sessions around memorable teaching, or around how to reduce the number of distractions that people face, and then folks come up to me afterwards and say, "Oh, Peps, tell me about the tattoos. Why have you got your shoes off?" And it's like, "Oh, I've just been trying to preach about distractions and I've put loads in." Oh, such hypocrisy.
Yeah. All my tattoos are hidden, so they never get. People don't even know I have them until I mention it. But yeah, maybe I should look,
yeah. Come on, Tom, show us. Let's have a look. Come on.
I'll show you one. Shall I look?
Yeah, let's have a look.
Live on air. Look, here we go.
Yeah. First showing, prime viewing. Tom's tattoo. You've seen it here first.
Yeah,
Tom's getting his guns out.
Emma, you're going to be next.
Tom's showing us his guns.
Oh wow.
My goodness!
This is standard model of particle physics. It's tattooed on my arm.
No way, serious?
And a whole bunch of other symbols there. Yeah,
you got the standard model.
True.
That is, wow, super geek. That's awesome. That is awesome. Yeah.
You might as well have the meaning of life tattooed on your arm.
Yeah. If you're gonna have something, Emma, what about you?
I have neither the signature dance move, which is the other thing you talk about, Peps. I also have my shoes on, and I have no tattoos. I am feeling so vanilla right now.
No tattoos yet. This is like this week. This week. It's never too late to start.
I went through a period about 3 years ago where I felt like it's sort of existentially mortal, and I was thinking, who cares? I mean, your body's your body, and then you die, and then why does it matter if you have any tattoos on it or not?
Right. You get to a certain age where you're like, I can't regret it for that much longer.
Yeah, exactly. Like, who's going to notice? I mean, barely anyone. So it's sort of... Anyway, look, I want to ask you about you, because you're someone who, am I right in thinking that you were sort of you started teaching, but then you went into teacher training quite quickly, and why was that so interesting to you? Sort of, you must have got a feel for the classroom, and you're someone who's been a professional teacher educator for longer than most people I know, who still is in the world and of it and doing it. So why did that sort of grab you, and what led you that way?
Yeah, so the story I tell myself anyway, who knows what the reality is, but the kind of story woven for myself is that so my mum's a teacher, a maths teacher like myself, and my sister and my wife, and 5 of her sisters. So there's a lot of maths teaching, just teaching in the family. And when I was growing, when she went to school, she went to the same school I went to, and she got to 6th form. And I think her head of maths said, "Wendy, go away, do your teacher training, and come straight back." And so she spent, the guts of her life in pretty much the same corridor, maybe even the same classroom. And actually, whenever I went to primary school, and part of my time at secondary school, after primary school was over, which ended before secondary school, I would just come and sit in the back of her classroom. So since the age of 4 or so, I've been sitting in the back of maths classrooms, or sitting somewhere in maths classrooms. So it was like age of 4 to like 7 in the back of mum's classroom, trying to answer the questions that all the kids were being asked, and just generally absorbing that experience. And then secondary school, got to sit in that classroom myself, and then went and trained to be a teacher, and was a maths teacher myself, so really experienced it from that angle. And then it kind of it felt like I taught in the classroom for about 7 years or so, and just always loved the kind of idea of helping other people to like understand what was going on in their classroom and how to do it better, trying to figure that out. And so I'd find myself sitting in the back of classrooms again, even when I was working in schools, because I was just so fascinated by watching the act and trying to deconstruct it and figure out what's going on and how can we make it better. And I suppose over time, any opportunity that came up to like mentor another teacher, or to support with the design of PD in the school, or to help out the local university at Brighton, I would be there, hand up, first in line. I'll help, just because I was so fascinated and so interested in the kind of the mechanics of teaching and learning. And so whenever a role came up there, about 7 years into my career, to run the PGC maths course at Brighton, I went for it. I thought, this is a really interesting next step for me. Of course, meant stepping out of the classroom and leaving all of the great stuff behind that was happening there. But for me, that trade-off was worth it at that time, and kind of has been ever since. I find, helping other people to get better at teaching just as satisfying as helping kids in the classroom.
Well, I agree with that. And Emma, you do the same, don't you? And that's we all have that in common, don't we?
Yeah, it's and I think I don't know if it's the same for you, Pep, but I always want to make sure that children have got really great teachers in front of them. And if you're in the classroom, your reach is 30 kids. And if you help other people, then that reach is much broader. So it's just such a privilege, like you say, to kind of watch other people develop and to help them develop. It's just an absolute joy. And I reference your books all the time with the teachers that I work with.
Thank you for the plug.
Does that form part of your thought process? I mean, like I don't know exactly when you started doing teacher training, but this is a debate we've had with a few people on our program about, like with Sam Twisselton, and this whole debate around the content of a PGCE versus other routes into training, and whether there's enough cognitive science in them, or whether universities should be free to set their own curriculum and all that. I mean, without, because obviously everyone has professional responsibilities. I don't put you into a tight position or anything, but do you feel like, do you have a view of that? Do you think universities should be kind of expansive, setting the agenda, or do you feel like this need to have a kind of a core curriculum around specific ideas is really needed?
Okay, so yeah, good question. There's probably like multiple answers to that question, if that makes sense. I think firstly, not just universities, but a wide range of stakeholders should be contributing towards what we think teaching is, and like what in particular, what like good teaching might look like, or what teachers might need to know to achieve it, or be able to do to achieve it. So I think it's a really important conversation to bring as many people into as possible, because it's just too complex for any kind of one group to be able to tackle. We need universities to be like contributing to, people within universities to be contributing to that, but also equally there are many smart people not working in universities, in schools, in teaching school hubs as PD trainers and other PD provider organizations, other policy organizations, loads and loads of different people who have good things to contribute to that conversation. So that's the first thing, is like, I think it's a professional responsibility for us all to figure out how to help, what good teaching means and how to improve it. But on the flip side, I think there is something of value in having a degree of coherence or alignment. It's a bit like, I often like to try and compare or think about the similarities between medicine and education. And actually, for the first few years of, medical training, what you really want is to ensure that as many doctors as possible, or physicians, get exposed to like what that sector as a whole thinks are the best ideas, and for there to be a degree of consistency across training around the country, because otherwise you end up with people being trained in one thing in place A and then moving to place B and not being able to build like coherently on the prior knowledge that they had at the other place. And so I do believe that a degree of consistency is a positive thing, like in net-wise across the sector. But then, of course, the trade-off that you get there is that you lose a little bit of the like ability to tailor knowledge to local context because of consistency. I suppose it's a bit like school contexts. Every teacher would like to have their own way of managing their classroom, but we know that when all teachers pull together and manage classrooms in the same way, you get this kind of multiplier effect, which means that pupils just, the culture is stronger within a school. And so it's this trade-off between the kind of individual and the collective, and finding that sweet spot in the middle, I think, is just an important thing for us always to be trying to pursue.
Yeah, the sweet spot. That's interesting. What
Michael Chaz has got a book on the, on the sweet
right up. I mean, so I saw the recent debate that's just sprung up, and I'm just throwing these questions randomly because I was just so interested in like the dynamics of our community. That a debate just sprung up recently in America, in California, about the maths curriculum, and it's like, and Joe Bowler is one of the famous figures associated with that, and there are schools of thought about maths education and debates and angry voices. So when you're in a teacher training scenario, do you have to take a view of that, or do you have to take an institutional view? And how much, when you were doing that, do you have a lot of degrees of freedom to be yourself and say, this is kind of what I think?
I suppose it depends on which role or what role I've been in. If you asked me that question about the level of autonomy I had when I worked at university, then I had a greater degree of freedom because I was working directly with a small group and had like almost complete control over certainly the subject specific part of that curriculum. In my work at Ambition, our programs reach a much greater audience, and so we have to make sure that the content of those programs is as applicable as possible to as many different people as possible. And so I suppose, like, what's the answer to the question? Yes, you do have to take a view, I suppose. Equally, you need to make sure that you are trying to expose teachers of whatever stage of their career they're in to the different debates within the sector as well, and help them to try and understand like the different sides of the argument and the different strengths of evidence. That's really hard, the Joe Bowler's situation is a really tricky one to try and like wrap your head around. There are really strong, like you say, really strong narratives coming from both sides, and it's not like I'd be very surprised if there was a really clear black and white answer about who's right in any of those debates, but just trying to help people, trying to weigh up the evidence and give them the kind of research literacy, for want of a better word, to be able to make good decisions about their professional practice. I think is a really important part of teacher education.
Yeah.
I'm just mulling over, Peps, because I don't know, and Tom probably rolled his eyes with this one, but I'm just thinking about kind of transferability and this idea of this broad general base that we're talking about everybody having sort of that general overview. And I just want to pick your brains about, where do you think the point comes at which you have to be more kind of phase specific? So what are the kind of general transferable elements that you think for all teachers, regardless of phase or stage, that they all need to know? Which are the bits do you think are truly phase specific and not necessarily transferable? Because there's lots of discussion within training and teacher development, which a lot of the time sort of primary or early years thinks, well, that's all very well and good, but that doesn't translate into teaching very young children. So I'm trying to kind of unpick your thinking about what are the general elements and what are the bits that are different in your view, in your experience?
So really interesting question, Emma. And yeah, one I've been trying to figure out for quite a while, and currently doing a PhD at UCL with Mark Hardman and Jenny Golding, supervisors. Shout out to them. Thank you, guys. I'm trying to like tackle this very question as part of it. And where I've kind of got to is that there are every teacher, regardless of phase and subject, is trying to tackle a common set of problems. But the solutions to those problems look different depending on your subject and context. So that's so let me try and explain what I mean here. So every teacher, regardless of whether you're early years or secondary maths teacher, is trying to figure out what they want their pupils to learn. So they're trying to figure out the curriculum piece. They're trying to conduct assessment. They're trying to understand what their pupils know based on that curriculum. They're trying to figure out how they help their pupils get from A to B, from where they are now to what they want them to learn. And they're trying to motivate them to a certain extent to invest their attention and effort in that journey, as well as trying to figure out how to regulate themselves to do all of those things in the moment. So those for me are like the 5 what Mary Kennedy might call persistent problems of teaching. There are things that every teacher faces regardless of the context that they operate in. However, the answer to those questions will vary quite a lot depending on the context you're in. In fact, the answer to those questions is probably unique for every single teacher. And it probably varies for the different classes you face and the different days you teach and the different, like phases of the year and all kinds of things. So, an early years teacher, the answer to the curriculum question would be very different to the secondary maths teacher. As a result, the answer to some of their assessment approaches might be quite different as well. However, the answer to the motivation question might actually be different in some ways, but the same in other ways. And that kind of, it's a bit of a, glib answer, but it depends. Some things are different and other things aren't as different. We have some common cognitive architecture, which kind of is common across humans, regardless of what age they are. And yet we have completely different curricula that we teach depending on the kind of stage and subject we teach. And so the interaction between those kind of differences are what make the training situation more or less specific. And so from a professional development perspective, we talked earlier about the need to kind of have some level of consistency to make sure that we're giving teachers the best deal possible, as well as having like a degree of tailoring to context. And I think this is how you reconcile those two things. You make sure you're asking all of these questions. What does how do we figure out how to help teachers decide what to teach the pupils? How do we help teachers to figure out how to assess them, how to motivate them, to instruct them, and to regulate themselves? But the answer to those questions will necessarily be quite different. And then what we need to use in the middle is basically all of the knowledge that we have, based both from the literature and from our experience, to try and weave an answer. And the more you kind of go from this side to this side, more from the kind of generic to the specific, the more input you will need from subject and phase specialists. So for example, that's why mentoring is a really good tool for helping to contextualize some of those ideas. We know that regardless of your teaching role, you've got to try and figure out how you assess well, but actually some of the principles of assessment will look very different in a secondary maths classroom to they do in early years classroom.
I think that's the best answer anyone's ever given to a question on our program.
I was going to follow it up with that. So is it possible, and this is not a leading question, I'm not trying to lead you on path here, is it actually possible to create a generic program for teaching if the answers are so specific?
Well, it depends what you mean by program. So,
as in a training, a generic course or a generic program for training teachers at any stage. Is it actually possible, do you think, to be able to say this is meaningful, this is relevant, this is transferable, this is actionable, and it doesn't matter who walks through my door, whether it's foundation stage or post 16, these things I'm going to say will work for you all. Is that possible?
Well, so yeah, I love it. It's a great question, right? And it depends what you mean by program. Okay, I'm going to come back to this again, Emma, because if you're just conceptualizing a program as like a body of content, then it would have to be enormously deep and responsive. Okay, so you have to be able to, you probably couldn't do it in a book form. You probably need some kind of digital architecture that allows you to go, right, I learn about like assessment, the generic principles of assessment, and then I'm going to click into like secondary specific, and then I'm going to click into secondary math specific, or you take the tree that takes you down to early years and you filter it down so you have both some of like the generic big ideas that we know apply to all assessment situations, as well as the like really specific examples of like that are relevant to you in your classroom. However, for me, a program is more than just a content. It's also the kind of delivery vehicle, the delivery mechanism, as it were. And like you can have a program whereby you have, a mentor, like the early career framework. And what the mentor does is they act as a kind of like a tailoring device. So rather than having this digital like content tree that allows you to like, responsibly find exactly the content for you, what the mentor does is they do a bit of that parsing of that content. And so perhaps if you introduce some of like the general principles of reliable and valid assessment, then what the mentor can do is, because they have experience of like what those look like in the classroom, can help an early career teacher, for example, see what this looks like in their context. For both a secondary maths teacher, you'd probably need a different mentor for early years because not many people have that dual specialism. But yes, so the answer is, I think you can if you have the right pieces in place. It's not enough just to have like a kind of a textbook curriculum, as it were. It needs to be a lot more sophisticated because of this kind of like, because of the different needs of the generic and specific, and the teachers need both, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like what I found in my work in the last couple of years is how far you can go. I mean, I do a lot of training with, say, through schools or maths, or you've got primary, early years and secondary, FE, all sort of wrapped in a place. And I find that there are a lot of concepts, like you've just outlined some, but even some much more practical ones like questioning techniques and concepts of retrieval and concepts to do with modelling. I was talking today about that, and modelling in early years looks different to modelling in a physics class, but it's still an idea that showing, how do children learn by being shown, and what does that mean, and how do you transfer, and all sorts of. And it's almost like you're asking a question. I think it's important that you're not just saying this is what to do, but you're saying, how do you do this, and how does it work? And so you get that. Do you think that, I mean, the most recent book that is it the most recent book? God, I don't know if it's a recent book, The Motivated Teaching Book.
It is, Tom Yogi, off the hook.
It's so good. I mean, it's almost like you could read it like a sort of self-help book, but it's also for adults, for teachers, for students. And it's so interesting, like you've this motivation for success. I mean, if I just rattle off there are 5 bits that you've put in our walkthrough. There's secure success, and I really want to ask you about that. There's run routines, so things that are kind of normal, and then nudge norms, build belonging, and boost buy-in, and all these things. I mean, there's a lot in each of
a lot of alliteration in there.
Yeah, good stuff, isn't it? So, I mean, for me, it's such an interesting thing there, because there's a lot of other stuff in our sector about, say, growth mindset and that kind of approach. But this idea of secure success, to me, is so essential, isn't it? Like, students who are struggling at school are not. It's like classic, why don't students like school? There it is. It's often because they can't do it, and it ain't fun. So this thing of just build motivation through just engineering success is so important. But that's true for teachers too, isn't it? If teaching feels like you're always chasing something and you can't do it, it's hard compared to when you're feeling, hey, I'm getting there. So do you think these are generic things, or are you thinking very schooly when you're talking about it in this book?
So in this book, I've tried to like tailor it specifically to the school context. I think there are some aspects of like the framework that are applicable to other contexts. So like social norms are just as powerful for book buying habits as they are for learning habits. They're just like the number of stars that you have on your book on Amazon, Tom, is like super important, that, and that's just as important in the classroom for a culture of like pupils feeling like comfortable asking questions in the class. However, like some of the stuff isn't like doesn't quite translate from the literature. So for example, there's like in the literature there's some interesting stuff around reward and like pleasure, like the role of pleasure in motivation, but actually it doesn't, like that kind of stuff just doesn't translate quite as easily into the classroom context, because like you say, learning is by its very nature often quite effortful, and so like some of the stuff that doesn't necessarily apply across all situations.
Well, I love this idea that you sort of lean in towards, like with the nudge norms, into some things around. I quite like the way it's quite sort of subtle language, but you don't go hard in like we all must do X, but at the same time you're sort of saying, but if there's an alignment about the way teachers are behaving, and you've got norms which are more then readily enforced, then it's easier for students to experience those as the norms. So do you feel that you find yourself through that going towards more sort of strongly kind of regime-orientated behaviour systems, or not? I mean, I wasn't sure. I mean, if you get asked those questions about which, again, there's camps on this, or are you a bit more nuanced around that?
Yeah, well, I think like there's definitely, so you have a bit. I think there's like a bit of a tension here that schools need to reconcile, because you have definitely evidence to suggest that social norms are really powerful. Okay, the more people you have like doing a certain thing, the harder for you it is to like do something different. And this is not just true in school, but for all of us. In the cinema, when everybody's sitting quietly, it's really hard for you to stand up and sing, whatever it is, or when everybody's queuing up for the club or wherever you guys go these days, it's really hard for you to go and push in the front. It's just like social norms have a really big like influence on our behavior, often heavily unconsciously. However, I think often like the counter to that, or the opposing force, is one of having a certain degree of autonomy or individual identity as well. And so, if you like go full down the like conformity route, you kind of end up with quite maybe a military type organization, which kind of doesn't allow any kind of like individual identity, which I think can be counterproductive to motivation to a certain extent. And so I think like schools, the challenge for schools is to try and find that sweet spot again in between, like balancing those two tensions. We know one hand, there's like strong evidence to suggest that if you get a large group of people doing a certain thing, and that thing's desirable, such as like aspiring to go on to college or to learn more, then great. The more you can encourage that, the more people you can have doing that, the more likely that you'll help those pupils who are struggling to like develop that aspiration. Whereas at the same time, people are unique and will have different aspirations, and so allowing those individual identities to also find some kind of identity will also allow them to like be more motivated as well, because they feel it's like they belong as an individual and aren't just part of like a mass group.
Yeah, God, it's so interesting, isn't it? Like, I mean, I've seen that. Well, I remember as a head of a grammar school, and so some students like tiny rebellions, like the little badge. It's like tiny thing, like their little breakaway was like, you could see it's funny, like you have the uniformity and you sort of almost are responsible for enforcing it, but then you're kind of pleased to see when people are kind of pushing against it. That's a challenge. It's a dilemma. Emma, what's your first sense of that?
Yeah, I was just thinking, whilst you're talking there, I was just thinking about how accessible you make everything that you say and how applicable to all those settings. And everything that you say and everything that you write, I always find myself sort of nodding along. And I described your take on things this morning. I was talking to a colleague and I went, it's just so crisp what he says. It's absolutely beautifully crisp, because I think you do what I was alluding to earlier, is that you manage to take any aspect of teaching, whether that's norms, whether that's lesson planning, whether that's motivation, whether that's anything, and you make it so crisp that anybody in any phase at any stage can access it. And I cannot say enough how much I use your work with staff at all stages, with staff in all phases, because I think you explain everything from the norms thing to the lesson planning thing to the motivation thing just so beautifully and so accessibly that it just makes so much sense. Massive amounts of sense. So I just wanted to say thank you, Peps, because you saved me a massive amount of time in what I do. But in terms of rebellion, we're not particularly rebellious at primary, Tom.
It's full of mavericks from what I see. I mean, I think
I think our rebellion in primary is just our day-to-day, to be perfectly honest.
Exactly. I think I feel like it's hard enough, just that whole thing of like herding cats on the carpet and stuff.
Oh, it is.
I mean, perhaps I'm interested in this. I mean, you have this fantastic job title, like you're called a dean, and I just think that's like one of my life goals. So, I mean, what is that? And so, we don't have to mean. You're dean of program design, and it's sort of, is this so? It's just, have you got like some exciting projects that you're working on? This whole teacher training space is quite dynamic at the moment, isn't it? And programs, national programs. Do you feel that's an exciting time for us?
Yeah, hugely. I really do. Really excited by the kind of level of investment that has been put into professional development across the board. The level of the conversation is just like head and shoulders above really anything I've come across before. I chat to folks like Doug Lemov or Ben Riley over in the US, or chatting to some people in Australia, and I talk to them about the kind of the degree of thought and degree of appetite for improving things over here, and their minds are blown. They really are. So I think I'm really, really grateful for the situation that we're in the UK, and of course, there are. I know there are areas that could be improved, and we can, always do better. But I do think we're at a point which is, really, really exciting. And over time, as long as we continue to iterate, continue to keep an open mind, and be open to, critique and improvement, that we're just going to keep, going from strength to strength. And if we can get to a point where we've got a really robust and reliable system for helping teachers to get better, not only at the start of their career, but throughout, I really do think, not only will it have a really profound impact on pupils in the classroom, but also on things like retention of teachers and the status of the profession as a whole, and the feeling that teachers have about like how professional they are. Like when you talk to doctors, one of the reasons that they have like such a high status and they feel like such a professional is because they just know a lot and have a huge amount of confidence in the knowledge that they do have. And so, hopefully, I think like we are taking steps in that direction. And yeah, really, I'd love to be able to like live for another 100 years to see like what this space is going to be like then. Maybe, yeah, who knows?
Can I just ask, Peps, the session that you did at Research Ed London?
Which one?
It was the last session of the afternoon, and you were talking about the snail. It had about I just found that completely fascinating, and I just wondered, because it links to your next book or your next piece of writing, doesn't it? So I just wondered if you wanted to give us a bit of a flavour of that or a bit of an overview of that, because I wrote copious notes during that session.
Yeah, sure.
It was absolutely brilliant.
Sure. So this next book's around developing teacher expertise, and it's really all about trying to like figure out what are the kind of frameworks that we might use to help us reliably develop teacher expertise. And I think we've already talked about one of the frameworks in the book, this like idea of the 5 persistent problems of teaching, and how that kind of like translates to a more specific context as well. We haven't, the other like framework that sits alongside it that we haven't talked about is kind of like the pedagogical arc that you need to take with teachers to help them learn that stuff. If that makes sense. And so this, the snail, yeah, we'll set aside the snail for the minute, but essentially there's like, I think there are a degree of, or are a number of professional development activities that we probably want to take all teachers through to get them to a point of like learning something in a meaningful and lasting way. And I think like, try and remember what the different things are. The first one I think is like get it. So get it is about like helping them to understand the mechanics of that aspect of teaching and learning. So earlier on we talked a little bit about assessment. So that might be helping them understand like what does reliability, validity, or perhaps even alternative concept mean in assessment. Like what is the big idea there? And then the next after get it is see it. So like what does that look like? Ideally in a classroom as close to a classroom as mine. So it's really like, I think it's really important that we provide teachers with really rich models that like are highly relevant to them, alongside that kind of like slightly more theoretical knowledge. And because those two, we need both sides of those coin for teachers to be able to be adaptive in the classroom. Adaptive expertise requires both like quite like highly fluent bank of strategies, as well as like strong understanding of how and why those strategies work, so that you can adapt them for different contexts and use them at the right time and place. But as well as like just seeing it and getting it, those things aren't enough, because we need to make sure that we kind of close that knowing doing gap, as it were. So all too often professional development used to just be about like helping teachers to showing teachers some stuff and telling them some stuff and assuming that was enough. But we know now that that doesn't lead to like lasting changes in behavior. So use it is a really important kind of principle as well, helping teachers to actually practice using those things, ideally to begin with in a lower stakes context. So not necessarily trying it out in the classroom as the first port of call, but perhaps trying it in a slightly lower stakes environment, with another member of staff who can give you feedback to see whether you're getting it right, or just even on your own in front of a mirror to run through things a few times without having the cognitive load of being able to manage all of the things that are going on in the classroom, as well as trying to change your practice. And then the kind of final piece there is around keeping it, because we can like get to a point where we're able to do something, but actually if that doesn't become part of the habit of our practice as a teacher, then that professional development was kind of wasted. And so there are, I think, some things we can do from a professional development perspective to lock in those habits. We can think about implementation intentions. We can think about kind of spaced retrieval from a PD perspective. There are a variety of things we can do. And then so those 4 things, the get it, the see it, the use it, and the keep it, are also wrapped up in a kind of like own it piece, which we have touched on a couple of times around motivation. Like motivation is as important for teachers as it is for pupils. We know, when teachers are bought in to the thing that they're learning, there's a much greater chance that they'll end up, much greater chance that they'll end up, putting that into practice. So there you go. There's the snail. If you can imagine those things in the shape of a snail. I was just doing that to wind Tom Bennett up.
Oh, Tom, you're on mute. Tom, you.
Amateur hour. It's because there's a washing machine going. It's a real life around here. So it's a power of 5s. Everything should be in 5s. But it's great. And also it sounds like a kind of a 70s disco song, which is also really good.
Get it, see it, use it, keep it.
Is that the signature dance move, Peps, that you mentioned?
I think it is. I'll tell you what, you need to come in. Someone needs to write a tune. And honestly, it's great talking to you. Honestly, I feel like we're just getting warmed up here, but we need to finish now. But it's fantastic. I'm really looking forward to that. I think it sounds fantastic. And I'm going to say again, we are super thrilled that you are in Walks Through the Street, both of you. and the motivation stuff is just, I feel like people are just sort of just getting into it, and there's so much material there. So if you're not read it yet, folks, get stuck into it. Motivated Teaching and the full suite. And Peps Mccrea, a short book coming to you soon about the disco do-its. And is there a name for that model? I mean, what's it going to be called? The
escargot.
You were going to say that.
That's great. Well, honestly, we have to stop now, and it's so great to talk to you. It really is fantastic, and I love it. I love what you're doing. It's so good to hear you explain all these brilliant ideas in person, and I'm sure people will really enjoy this episode. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been a real pleasure, and hope to catch up to you before long. Thank you so much.
Thanks both. Lovely chatting. See everybody. Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Okay, so that's the end of this episode. Thanks for joining us once again on Mind the Gap, making education work across the globe with me and Emma. Hope everyone's having a good break by the time you have listened to this. You may have had a good break, but thank you so much to Peps, and we'll see you on another episode coming soon. Thanks, everybody.